Today on Season 2 of the Color Outside the Box podcast.
Hebrews tells us that a wedding bed is undefiled, meaning whatever the husband and wife does in the confounds of their bedroom with each other only, God blesses it. But outside of that, there's no blessing attached to that.
Color Outside the Box is a podcast series that focuses on creating a better you. Whether it's advice about family, relationships, raising children in this technological world, marriage, or careers, we seek to find the answers to help you live your best life. So start your Monday morning off right with me, your hostess with the mostest, Princess Miller, on Color Outside the Box right here on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be heard. Well, good Monday morning, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Color Outside the Box podcast with your hostess, Princess Miller, and I am here with another special guest. Our guest today is Elder Latranza Burrell. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Princess. How are you?
Doing great. And we have a lot of shows that we're going to be talking about this month, and we're going to be focusing back on the family aspect, marriage and relationship, and even raising kids. And so this first show, we're going to talk about marriage. Why is marriage important today? Elder Latranza, tell us a little bit about why is marriage important today?
Well, we know that marriage was the first institution that God created. And it's very important to God that we make like Christians in the confounds of a marriage. So he created male first, then female, and he joined them together to procreate so that they could have dominion and rule over this earth that he had already made for us.
Yes, and I'm totally in agreement with that. I want to drill down because, just as important as you mentioned that today, it seems like we're getting away from marriage. I had an aunt that visited recently, and she and I were talking, and she hasn't been married for a number of years. And she said, they said by 2023 or 2024, there will be no more marriage. And at first I was appalled at that statement. And then as I was scrolling through Facebook a couple of weeks ago, I began to read about the laws that have changed in the state of Alabama, where marriage is a ceremony, but you don't get a certificate that signifies that you're married. And so I thought this show was so befitting today because we need to be reminded why marriage is important. Today they have open marriages. They have all these different variations of what they think marriage is. There is a famous rapper that recently came out and said that he and his wife have threesomes. They don't have an open marriage, but they have threesomes. And they have rules as to why, the threesomes are in place, and that he's not allowed to he's not allowed to sleep outside the marriage unless she is involved. Wow. And I was like, wow, this is, and kids are looking up to this guy. And here he is professing that, I don't cheat on my wife. We cheat together. Wow. And it's an understanding, and it's okay. And I'm happy and I'm fulfilled in my marriage. And a couple of months ago, I had Travis Cook on the show, and we talked about marriage, and we talked about why do they have open marriages? And one of the things that he said was, the reason why they have open marriage is because they're not being fulfilled in their marriage. So then they get an agreement to go outside the marriage to get the fulfillment that they're not getting inside the marriage. So basically, I'm married to you, but you don't fulfill me. So I got to go outside the marriage. So let's just talk about some of these different variations because we need to be reminded why God created marriage.
Well, I think for me, I think that people are trying to put their own spin on what God created. Mm-hmm. And if you're not going to follow the blueprint, then why even get married? Mm-hmm. Marriage was designed by God for God's people for a purpose, to reproduce after our kind in his likeness for this earth. And we can't get outside of that. And I think that I disagree with the fact that marriage will not be in by 2024 or 2054, because there's always going to be a remnant of God in this earth until he returns. So therefore, it's up to us as Christians to define what marriage is based on what the Bible tells us and live it in front of people so that they'll want to emulate what they see, because there's no way I can believe that whomever this person is, this rapper is, and his wife, that they're both in agreement to the degree that there's not going to be jealousy, there's not going to be envy, there's not going to be strife, and they'll probably not stay married any length of time with that type of behavior going on, because that's not a closed marriage. That's an open marriage, and that opens you up to all types of spirits and coming into your marriage. And then your children are watching, because people believe that children don't see what they do even when they're not around, but children are very observant, and it will affect the confounds of that household. I'm certain it will, because that how could it not? When you've invited other people into your bedroom. Hebrews 13:4 tells us that the wedding bed is undefiled, meaning the wedding bed that the husband and the wife share is undefiled. Whatever they're pleased to do with one another, God blesses. But bringing anybody else or anything else, because I was just looking at something on Facebook where a woman outside of this country married a dog. So you got to be mindful that people are doing all types of immoral things in the confounds of what they call marriage, but not what God calls marriage. So I really believe that whoever that couple is, with them allowing other people to come inside their marriage bed, that is not going to be blessed and is not going to be fulfilled. There's going to be envy, there's going to be strife, there's going to be jealousy, and it'll likely lead to divorce. And it's definitely going to affect the children if there are children in the confounds of that marriage, because they're going to know, despite what the parents think, they're going to know that there are some issues going on within that marriage.
Yeah, I see that. I really think that it's a ploy to try to get away from the traditional marriage. And I had a conversation recently with a client and made them very mad, but he wanted to justify the fact that he told his wife that he is going to have relations outside of their marriage, and he wants more kids. And since she can't give him kids, he's going to go outside the marriage. And so I told him, I said, well, how would you feel if she decided that, okay, well, if you decide that you're going to do what you want to do, how about I do what I want to do? Oh, that'll never happen. And I said, well, why not? God didn't design that.
Okay, then. Wow.
And so I said, well, trying to figure out where his reasoning was coming from. He said, and I quote, God allowed Solomon to have concubines and multiple wives. And during that time, you didn't hear about divorce as much, because people were happy because the man could have as many wives as he liked, as long as he took care of all of them. Well,
and let me ask you a question. Is he in the position to take care of multiple concubines, wives, and mistresses? Meaning, monetarily, is he able? Can he afford to even do what he's professing to you that he would like to do?
He said he can.
Bless his heart.
And he's born here in America. He's not a foreigner. His family is from Georgia. So it's not like he got this idea from, like, they, came from another country that allowed, husbands to have multiple wives and then came to America with this idea. No, he's born and bred here, and he's, basically justifying why he should be able to step outside his marriage whenever he wants to, because he feels like it's in the Bible and the Bible is right and God, allowed it. And so I told him, I said, well, that's not what God allowed. Well, he allowed it, but that's not God's will, is what I said.
Right. Well, God defined what marriage was in the very beginning. Now, through the years, people have sanctioned a lot of things that God gives us a permissive will to do, but that doesn't mean he blesses it. It doesn't mean that he's even winking at it. There are consequences to sin, and the end result is death, whether it be a death of a marriage, death of a relationship, or ultimate death of your oneself. We have to be careful. I believe that we're living in the end times because people are doing all sorts of things that's fulfilling their own flesh. They're lovers of themselves. They don't love marriage. They don't love children, don't love parents. Parents don't love children. Husbands and wives don't love each other. You're allowing all of these other things to enter into a covenant. I say stop getting married because you're not fulfilling the purpose that God designed it for. Homosexual marriages. If you don't want to do it the way that the Creator designed it to do, come up with your own term. And I guess that's why laws are changing, because now they're just legal binding contracts without being marriages and no certificate involved. But I tell you, God is not pleased. And I say we as Christians must stand up and continue to teach our children the right way so that God will be glorified and he'll be pleased. And because there are not, although it appears as if sin is running rampant and it's going to overthrow God, that's not true. And we see from the Bible days up until now that God always had a remnant and he always has a plan in place. And there's always going to be somebody that's going to stand up for the truth. And I say that's our job to do as Christian.
I really think that when they made that law, they were basically trying to prevent homosexuals from being able to marry legally. And it got flipped on them. So they said, okay, well, judges, if you don't want to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, then we're not going to issue licenses to anybody. And so here's the new, parameters in place. You can come to the courthouse, you can pay your money, we'll file it, and you good to go. You don't even have to go to a minister and get married now. You don't have to, see the judge to perform the ceremony. It's basically signing on the dotted line now and paying your money. And so I think sometimes we have to take a step back. And I know they were trying to take a stance for God, but at the same time, think about how that's going to affect, now they're basically saying marriages are null and void and except, a legal contract now in Alabama. And I was reading a story just yesterday thinking about this topic, and there was a lady, she moved in with this guy and they were together for 20 years and the guy died. And so with his passing, his kids decided that she was just a tenant and she needs to vacate the apartment that they had. Now, this is in the state of New York. And so she was basically saying, well, we were together for 20 years. He proposed to me. I have a ring. We were married in every sense of the word, just not legally. And so in the state of New York, they don't recognize common law marriages. Right.
Well, now in the state of Alabama no longer recognizes common law marriages as well. And that's why, it's good that you brought this up, because me and one of my sisters were talking about this on yesterday. In the event that people die in these type of situations, when one of the partners, companions, or whatever you want to call yourself in that state, dies, generally that's what happens. Family members step up and say, okay, you're not legally married, so therefore we can vacate you from the premises. That disallows you to be able to keep any properties that y'all may have attained together. Now, California, that didn't happen there, but there you need to know what you're doing when you enter into these type of relationships. But I say marry. And that secures your position in the world and with God, and that will prevent or preclude other people to come in and determine what your value and your worth is when it comes to properties and things that you've attained. But people just need to tell the truth about the matter, and we need to be as transparent as we can be when we are talking to our families, our friends, and our coworkers, even when they don't necessarily agree. But just speak truth. And because anytime the word of God goes forth, it will not return unto God void. It will accomplish with whomever he chooses to. It'll accomplish what he set out for it to do. And that's our responsibility. But going back to what you were saying regarding these legal contracts in the state of Alabama, that is exactly what happened. The Christian judges decided that they were not going to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And I agree with them on that regard. And they had a right to do so because that's their religious belief. Maybe they didn't know it would go this far, but I know that God has a plan. And I'm not deceived in any kind of way thinking that this is going to stay the way that it is. But we as Christians must step up. And I think we ought to get into politics. I think we ought to get into those arenas where we can help change the laws back to the way God wants them to be. But to sit idly by on the sidelines and do nothing is exactly that. Nothing will happen.
You spoke a mouthful when you said that. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more Color Outside the Box podcast with Elder